speeches by President Obama and House Speaker John Boehner. Then at 12:15 Eastern, senators will vote on 2 judicial nominations. They'll recess after those votes for their weekly party lunch meetings and return at 2:15 Eastern to begin debate on the debt reduction plan. It's offered by Democratic leader Harry Reid yesterday. It raises the debt ceiling through the elections in 2012 and reportedly cuts the deficit by nearly $3 trillion over 10 years. It does not include tax or revenue increases. And now to live coverage of the U.S. Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
Will lead the Senate in prayer. The chaplain.
Let us pray. O God, our shelter in the time of storm, our strong tower, we praise your righteous name. Lord, preserve this nation by the power of your might, leading our senators through this challenging season of our nation's history. Keep them from the pit of disunity and discord and empower them to build bridges of cooperation. Give them the courage and humility to do what is right, knowing that you are the only constituent they absolutely must please. Help them to discover the joy of trusting you and the peace of doing your will, receiving the strength you provide to those who love you. We pray in your sacred name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., July 26, 2011, to the Senate. On the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Jean Shaheen, a senator from the state of New Hampshire, to perform the duties of the chair. Son Daniel K. Inouye, President Pro Tempore.
Madam President.
The Majority Leader.
Following any leader remarks, the Senate will be in morning business until 12:15. The majority will control the first 30 minutes. Republicans will control the second 30 minutes. At about 12:15, the Senate will be in executive session. I shouldn't say about, at 12:15. The Senate will be in executive session to consider the nominations of Paul Engelmayer to be a United States District Judge for the Southern District of New York, and Ramona Manglona to be a District Judge for the Northern Mariana Islands. There will be 2 minutes of debate prior to the roll call vote on confirmation of the Engelmayer nomination. The Manglona nomination is expected to be confirmed by a voice vote. And I would ask my friends on the Judiciary Committee, I'm not sure we need the debate today. It was already debated yesterday. I would hope that we could go directly to that vote at 12:15. The Senate will be in recess until 2:15 to allow for weekly caucus meetings. At 2:15, the Senate will resume consideration of S. 1323, the legislative vehicle for the debt limit increase. Madam President, I now ask unanimous consent that the 3 interns in Senator Bingham's office, Nick Crismali, Rosie Ortega, and Emma Rubin, be granted floor privileges during today's business.
Without objection.
Madam President, there's been a lot of talk in the last 24 hours about so-called dueling plans to raise the debt limit and avert a dangerous default on this nation's financial obligations. But as far as I can tell, the only dueling going on in Washington today is between Republican parties and multiple personalities, and there are quite a few. Last night I introduced an amendment that I thought was fail-safe. It would prevent default using only proposals Republicans have already supported Yet House Republicans had harsh words for Democrats' plan yesterday. Odd, considering every bit of our proposal was taken from the Republican playbook. Let me explain the plan. It would avert default while cutting $2.7 trillion from the deficit in the next decade. It would cut more money more quickly than a competing proposal introduced by Republican leaders yesterday, and it would last for a long time, not just a few months. So we'd be back in the trenches doing the same thing at Christmas time that we're doing now. The proposal includes no revenues. As House Republicans insisted, it must not. It holds harmless even the most wasteful of tax breaks and giveaways to big oil companies and billionaires who Republicans have vowed to protect even if it costs our economy in the process. It establishes a joint congressional committee to find additional savings this year and guarantees that committee's recommendations will be an up or down vote on the Senate floor. No amendments, no filibuster, yes or no. We've done this before. It worked well with our base closing legislation a few years ago. And every single spending cut in the proposal has already been endorsed by Republicans. I repeat, every single spending cut in the proposal has already been endorsed by Republicans. The cuts have already been voted for by Republicans in both houses of Congress. In short, it's everything Republicans have demanded wrapped up in a bow and delivered to their door. But now Republicans say their demands, which have been met in full, aren't enough. They insist instead that we pass their plan, a similar plan in many respects, save for several crucial details. Their plan also raises the debt ceiling, but for only a few months. It cuts spending and includes no revenue increases. These are the major differences. It does not cut as much from the deficit as the legislation I introduced last night. In fact, not nearly as much. And it is a short-term fix that Republicans know is untenable to Democrats in the White House and Congress. In short, the Republican plan they know will not pass the Senate of the United States. Not long ago, it was untenable for the Republicans. This is what Speaker Boehner said about short-term measures in May. Speaker of the House of Representatives, John Boehner, said this in May. Quote, "I'm not really interested in a short-term increase in the debt limit. Our economy won't grow as long as we continue to trip it up with short-term gimmicks from Washington." End of quote. House Majority Leader Cantor echoed the sentiment in June. Quote, I'm not sure how, if we're not willing to make tough decisions now, we'll be willing to make them later. It is my preference that we do this thing one time. Putting off tough decisions is not what people want. End of quote. Yes, Madam President, we agree. We agree, certainly we agree. This is what the Washington Post said about Republicans' bizarre about-face yesterday. Quote, "It seems that perhaps the only meaningful difference between the two plans is that the Democratic plan gets it done in one fell swoop, while the GOP proposal does a short-term deal followed by another a year later, something that financial analysts say could lead to a downgrade of the U.S. credit rating, and the Republicans themselves once opposed," end of quote. And in fact, Madam President, rating agencies have said as late as last night that the plan that I introduced will not cause a downgrading of our credit. The one the Republicans have introduced will. Republicans are insisting we relive the endless negotiation and partisan wrangling of the last 6 weeks again, 6 months from now, with no good outcome guaranteed. And I've said a short-term solution isn't really a solution at all. And it puts us right back in this untenable position a few short months from now. It gives the markets no stability, gives the American people no certainty, and it gives the credit rating agencies no choice but to downgrade U.S. debt, a move that would cause interest rates to rise and effectively increase taxes for every American, every American. Market analysts and credit rating agencies have said a short-term fix would risk many of the same effects as a default, and that's a risk our economy can't afford. If Republicans continue to oppose a reasonable proposal I brought to the floor last night, and which we'll vote on here in the Senate soon, it will be for political reasons driven by the ideological Tea Party. It will be crystal clear that Republicans don't care if we default on the debt. That's sad but true. After all, we've given them a plan they should, by all rights, be guaranteed to pass the House, and the Senate support here, which we should have, it should pass, both houses. Yet they've trashed it right out of the gate. Yesterday, the Washington Post called this debate over whether to default on the full faith and credit of the United States of America surreal and bizarre. That was their words. This commentary is valid. Reasonable Republicans have been offered absolutely everything they asked for. Still, they refuse to take yes for an answer, all because of a cadre of unreasonable Tea Party-driven House Republicans. That's too bad, Madam President. I would ask the Chair announce the business today, the work for the Senate today.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business until 12:15, with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the time equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with the majority controlling the first 30 minutes and the Republicans controlling the second 30 minutes.
Madam President.
The Senator from California.
Madam President, I want to thank Leader Harry Reid for stepping into the breach in this situation and offering us a way out of this, what I consider to be, Republican-made crisis. Why do I say that? The debt limit has been increased 89 times since 1939. 55 times under Republican presidents and 34 times under Democratic presidents. Never has either party ever brought us to this brink of default. Never, never, never in the history of America. It is a man-made crisis. It is a Republican-made crisis. It has never happened before. The real challenge we face is clearly with our deficit and our debt. And guess what the good news is there? We had this crisis before, this challenge before, and we stepped up to the plate, and we passed a budget when Bill Clinton was president that not only balanced the budget, and we didn't need a constitutional amendment to the Constitution to do it, we did it by working it out, by cutting out the waste and the fraud and abuse in government, by choosing to invest in important areas like education, high-tech, biotech at that time, which created jobs, which created so many jobs in this country, 23 million jobs. That was the absolute result of this very good budget. Now, all a budget is it expresses the hopes and dreams of the people, the priorities of the people. So that challenge was met before. So we know how to do it. You sit down, you figure out what's a waste of spending, what's important spending, and you pursue policies that create jobs. We did it before, we can do it again. It's a challenge, but we can do it because we did it. Now, others will say, in order to do it, you have to have a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. Well, the facts just don't back that up. In order to get a balanced budget, you simply have to balance the budget. You simply have to do the hard work to get it done. Now, this man-made crisis, this Republican-made crisis, is totally unnecessary. I never heard one of these folks who says, let's go in default. I never heard them speak out during the George W. Bush years when we raised the debt ceiling 9 times. And some of them were around during the Reagan years. 18 times the debt ceiling was raised. Now, under George W. Bush, my Republican friends raised the debt ceiling by 90%. President Obama is asking for an increase of about 18%. So America, figure it out. All of a sudden, after putting 2 wars on the credit card, tax cuts to millionaires and billionaires on the credit cards, like my Republican friends did, a prescription drug policy which was not paid for. None of it was paid for. They put it on the credit card, and now they say, oh, woe is me, we have a debt. Well, they should have discovered that before. In 8 years, George W. Bush turned a $236 billion surplus into a $1.3 trillion deficit, and that's what our President Obama inherited. Now, we have a moment of opportunity here. And I think what Senator Reid has done is given us a way out of this mess. We put into place $2.7 trillion of cuts, and we give a sense of certainty to the marketplace for 18 months that this debt ceiling is taken care of. Now let's get back to business around here of taking care of this long-term deficit and debt challenge and creating jobs for our people and protecting Medicare and Social Security and all the rest that we have to do. We have to build our infrastructure. I'm chairman of the committee that's in charge of the highway bill. We have good bipartisan cooperation, but we need to get this resolved. The Boehner plan is so short-term, it sends a chill through the marketplace. I used to be a stockbroker many, many years ago, and when the president got a cold, the stock market went down. It's very sensitive to these things. And the Boehner plan, according to some commentators, will cause a downgrade of our securities. And I don't think we should be in the business of downgrading America, Madam President. We should be in the business of lifting up America, of letting the people know we're taking care of their business. The Republicans' interest is going after the middle class, the working poor, to protect the millionaires and the billionaires. Well, here's where we are with that policy. The 400 richest Americans have more wealth than the first 50% of the American people. Imagine. The richest 10% of all Americans control two-thirds of America's net worth. The average CEO receives 180 times more in compensation than the average production worker. In 1965, CEOs made 24 times more in compensation, now 185 times. Now, what you hear when you suggest that millionaires and billionaires pay just a little bit more to help America get out of this challenge that we face, you see a almost out-of-control defense from the Republicans about why we shouldn't even consider asking them to pay even 2 cents more. They say, don't tax the job creators. So I said to my staff, let's take a look at who are the job creators and what do they earn. As everybody knows, the small businesses are the biggest job creators. But I want to make it clear here, only 1.4% of taxpayers with business income of over $500,000 per year are in that category. So what I'm saying is, you say don't tax the job creators, and we're looking at taxes of people over $500,000 a person. That's only 1.4% of the job creators. So we're not touching 98% of the job creators. So don't get up here and say we want to tax the job creators. Not at all. Not true. We do want to ask millionaires and billionaires to pay their fair share. On July 21st, 200 millionaires signed a letter asking congressional Republicans to consider healing the budget gaps with increased revenue. Higher taxes on them. They say despite our willingness to provide additional support to the country financially to ensure its continued well-being, despite the overwhelming support of the idea among the American public, despite the reality that millionaires like us are paying lower taxes now than any other time in the last 60 years, and despite the fact that the Bush tax cuts are the single largest cause of the deficit, you, they say to the Republicans, have repeatedly refused to consider a reasonable step to address our country's fiscal challenges. And they say we are writing to reiterate our demand that you look to the millionaires and billionaires. Look, our challenge of deficits and debt can in fact be met. We know the road. The road is clear. The road was really built by President Bill Clinton and the Democrats at that time, And eventually, a lot of Republicans came on with us eventually. In the beginning, they predicted gloom and doom from the Clinton budget. I have a bunch of quotes about members who are still here on the Republican side who said the Clinton budget is going to lead to a recession, it's going to lead to unemployment, it's going to lead to deficits. Well, we went into a great period of prosperity, 23 million jobs, a budget in balance, and a debt about to be extinguished down the road. That all got upended by the Republican plan to lower the taxes on the richest Americans and put it on the credit card. Go into 2 wars and put it on the credit card. Pass a prescription drug benefit and protect the big pharma by saying Medicare can't negotiate for lower prices. They put that on the credit card. So it is no wonder that we face this problem. Now, when President Obama got in, we were bleeding jobs at $800,000 a month, almost $1 million a month. And I would ask that I have 1 additional minute to sum up.
Without objection.
And so President Obama and all of us knew that there was a frozen banking system. We had to make sure that that credit system was working. We had to make sure that we created some jobs. We passed the stimulus bill, and despite all the talk about how it didn't work, experts say it stopped a depression. So yes, we had to add those things as well. And now it's time to pull together as Americans. This isn't about Republicans or Democrats. The people of this country agree that millionaires and billionaires should pay more. But right now, what Senator Reid has said is set that aside. Let's get on with our work. Let's get out of this mess. For 18 months, get this out of politics, give a sense of certainty to the marketplace, and let's address the issues. And John Boehner, who spoke to the nation last night, is presenting a patchwork quilt that expires in a few months. We'll be back to this nightmare. We face downgrades of our creditworthiness. So, Madam President, let's get behind the Reid proposal and let's work together and get this country back on its feet. Uncertainty is the worst option. Thank you very much, and I yield the floor. I thank my colleague from Illinois.
Senator from Illinois.
I want to thank my colleague from California. This is an historic week in the United States Senate, and she has spelled out what we face. I would guess most people around America are looking at Washington and Capitol Hill now and asking if there are any grown-ups left. Can adults sit down there in both political parties and solve our nation's problems? It's a legitimate question because we are up against the deadline of August 2nd and the expiration of America's mortgage, the debt ceiling. What it basically means is for the first time in history, if we don't act, we will default on our debt. That's significant because the United States enjoys a reputation around the world, the highest economic reputation around the world. AAA bond rating is as good as it gets. If you're going for your credit score and you got a AAA rating, you're in great shape. You can not only borrow what you need, but at a good interest rate, and that's where the United States is today. But if we fail to do what we're supposed to do between now and August 2nd and default on our debt, it'll be the first time ever that it has occurred. It will mean that the promise of America to pay its bills has been broken, and it will mean that our creditors around the world will have questions about whether or not we can be trusted. When creditors have questions, they cover the risk by raising interest rates. So if the interest rate on America goes up 1%, just 1%, it costs us $130 billion a year added to our debt, projected over 10 years, $1.3 trillion for every 1 point interest. So tempting fate and going to August 2nd in that circumstance is not a good thing. Not just because America's debt grows, but because interest rates all around America will then rise with it. So if you're borrowing money for a car, a home, on a credit card, your interest rates just went up. And Congress, without passing a tax bill, has just imposed a new tax on you. It will be the tax for defaulting on our debt ceiling. So what we're trying to do this week is to work out some sort of an agreement between Republicans and Democrats, House and Senate, and the President to avoid this crisis. As the senator from California accurately said, this is not a crisis like a natural disaster or even a terrorist attack. This is a manufactured political crisis right here on Capitol Hill. We don't have to have this. It's never happened before. What we're doing with this kind of high noon scenario, wait till the last minute to solve your problem, is creating a problem that is going to cost us dearly. And there are ways around it. Senator Harry Reid is going to come forward on the Senate floor on behalf of the Democrats, and we hope with Republican support, with a plan to deal with this deficit and this debt ceiling. What the Majority Leader will propose is that we will make cuts in spending, which will reduce our deficit, $1.2 trillion in cuts over 10 years. It's a lot of money, and I think it's a significant indication that we're serious about our debt. In addition to that, what we will have is an increase of our debt limit until February of 2013. Now, it's only in Washington, as one of my colleagues said this morning, that 18 months is considered a long-term commitment. What we know is if we don't make a long-term extension of the debt ceiling, we're going to have to go through this scenario, political scenario, again and again. Each time we do, it calls into question the credit status of the United States. And so what we are going to try to do this week with bipartisan support is move forward in dealing with this crisis in a responsible way, reducing spending, extending the debt ceiling, and I can say that everything included in Senator Reid's proposal, which he brought to the floor, has been either proposed by or voted in favor of by Republicans. So it is a bipartisan approach, and I think it's an honest approach, and I'm hoping we can reach an agreement on it. I see my colleague from Maryland is here. I'd like to ask him before I proceed if he's asking for time in morning business, and how much time is the senator looking for? As much as he can get. 10 minutes. How much time is remaining in morning business on the Democratic side?
13 minutes and 40 seconds.
Then I'm going to be very brief and then yield to the floor to my colleague from Maryland. Let me say this. Madam President, I believe that we can deal with our debt responsibly. And I say that having been through a year and a half working on this issue. I'm still not an expert, but I know a lot more about it now than I did at the start. And we worked together, Democrats and Republicans, on the President's Deficit Commission and came up with a plan supported by 11 out of the 18 members, including myself and a number of Republican senators and Democratic senators, Senator Kent Conrad, the chairman of the Budget Committee. We all supported it. We believed there was a bipartisan way to reduce the debt by $4 trillion over 10 years and to do it in a sensible, balanced way, bringing into consideration not only spending cuts, but also reform of our entitlement programs and revenue. On the entitlement programs, many senators and many people get nervous when you start talking about Social Security and Medicare. I will tell you, I am committed to these programs. I believe in them. The reason I've stayed with this conversation is because I want to make certain that at least one or maybe more at the table feel as I do about the importance of Social Security and Medicare. I believe we can make reasonable changes in each of those programs, preserve the basic benefit structure, particularly for working Americans, and make sure that they have the promise of the security which these programs bring. I know that people in retirement wonder if the savings are going to last, whether the pension will be around, but, you know, they just know for sure Social Security will be there. I want to make sure that promise is kept, not just for the next 25 years, but 50 years beyond and even beyond that. We can do it, and making modest changes now can achieve it. On Medicare, health insurance for elderly and disabled people, Medicare is a bigger challenge. In 6 years or so, we start running out of money. Let's get serious about this. Let's do things now that will avoid that crisis. We don't want that. We want to make sure that people have the peace of mind of knowing that they have health insurance. We can do it in a sensible, responsible way. Let's do it together, not with the determination of ending the program. I'll never let that happen on my watch, but to make sure that the program has a long life, a solid life, a solvent life. And when it comes to revenue, there is a way to do this. $1.2 trillion is lost each year in our tax code to deductions and credits and exclusions and special treatment given to some and not to others. We can take a look at that and do it in a way that says we're going to preserve the basics that we need. Yes, we need the mortgage interest deduction. Yes, we need the charitable deduction. Yes, we need to make sure that people have their health insurance exclusions from their income. We can do that and still lower the amount of tax expenditures and use that money to reduce the deficit. That is a reasonable way of raising revenue in a sensible manner. Men and women of good faith in both political parties can do this. Let's pass Senator Harry Reid's proposal this week. Let's avert this crisis. Let's tackle the long-term deficit and debt challenge in a balanced way by putting everything on the table. We did it with the Deficit Commission. We've done it with the Gang of Six. We can do it again. What we need is the support of the American people to encourage us on beyond our critics. That's always going to happen, but beyond our critics to the kind of conclusion where people will once again feel a little pride in what goes on here in Washington on Capitol Hill. I yield the floor to my colleague from Maryland.
Madam President.
The Senator from Maryland.
Madam President, let me first thank our Assistant Democratic Leader, the Majority Leader, for his incredible work on this subject, on the Bowles-Simpson Commission. Senator Durbin, you were a real voice of reason and brought together diverse views. We need that this week. And then with the Gang of Six, with your colleagues in the Senate on both sides of the aisle, you were able to bring us together with achieving two goals, and that's what we have to do. One is we need to raise the debt limit, and secondly, we need a credible plan to deal with the deficit. And I think you have added greatly to that accomplishing those goals, reaching across party line, understanding it cannot be what the Democrats want or what the Republicans want, but we have to work together. But I must tell you, at this moment, we're 7 days away from the August 2nd date. So we have two goals. Goal number one is to raise the debt limit so that we don't default on America's obligations. Raising the debt limit needs to be our goal number one. We've already incurred this debt. This is not about increasing America's spending. This is for spending that has already occurred, and now we have to pay the bills. The cost of default is unimaginable to the American people. They'll pay more as taxpayers because the cost of government borrowing will go up. We know that. That's not speculation. We know that. But the cost to every American will go up because the cost of your home mortgages will go up, the cost of credit card interest will go up, student loan costs will go up, all of the borrowing costs in America will go up. But, Madam President, it will also hurt our economy. It will cost us jobs. It makes no sense whatsoever to be here without raising the debt limit. Senator Reid's proposal does that through 2012. It gets the job done. Speaker Boehner's proposal does not get it done, another short-term extension. And we should listen to the experts in the market. Christian Cooper, who is a currency expert and trader, said, and I quote, "From the market's point of view, a two-stage plan is a non-starter. There is significant risk of downgrade with a deal that ties further cuts to another vote only a few months down the road, given the significant resistance to do the right thing now," end quote. So Speaker Boehner's proposal just kicks the can down the road for a couple more months without resolving the problems. That's goal number one. The Reid plan accomplishes that. Goal number two is having a credible plan to get our debt under control. The President was right as he explained how we got here last night. He went through how under the Bush administration, the previous administration, how we took a surplus to a deficit through cutting taxes not once but twice, by two wars that were not paid for, by spending programs that weren't paid for, and now we're in a situation where we have a non-sustainable deficit. That's accurate. It's our responsibility to make sure that we have a credible plan to deal with the deficit. Leader Reid's proposal gives us that glide path. Now, I think all of us would like to see a grand deal, a grand bargain. That's not going to be achieved by August the 2nd. Senator Reid's proposal gives us the glide path for a responsible, credible plan to bring our debt under control. Speaker Boehner's proposal does not do that. It just basically says we'll deal with it at a later time. Look at the down payment. Leader Reid gives us $2.7 trillion of deficit reduction now that we can enact by August the 2nd. Well, Speaker Boehner gives you $1.2 trillion. It's clear that 2.7 really gets us much closer to the $4 trillion goal that we all know that we need to achieve. But it also gives us a game plan to be able to achieve the $4 trillion in deficit reductions that we all know that we need to do. Madam President, you and I are in agreement how we could get that done now. We know that. We have a plan. The problem is we can't get that done by August the 2nd because we can't get the Republicans in the House to move on a balanced plan. We understand that. Well, the Reid proposal preserves all options but gives us a way to get to the $4 trillion of deficit reduction that is clearly needed. It allows the use of a joint committee that will use a balanced approach. Now, we have models they can look at. The Bowles-Simpson Commission is a balanced approach to bring in a credible plan to deal with the deficit. The Gang of Six gives us a balanced approach in order to deal with our deficits. So we have the model before us in order to get it done. But let me tell you why I think Leader Reid's proposal is the best way for us to proceed 7 days before the August 2nd deadline. It gives the Republicans basically what they have asked for. You know, we can't do this by Democrats alone. We need Democrats and Republicans working together. The Reid proposal represents the views of the members of the Senate on both sides of the aisle. Now, why do I say that? From the beginning, the Republicans have been saying that we have to have a dollar-for-dollar reduction in debt for a dollar increase in the debt ceiling. Now, Madam President, there's no relationship between our current spending and what the debt ceiling represents, because, as I said earlier, it represents what we've already spent. But okay, that has been what the Republicans said we had to do. Leader Reid's proposal does that. A $2.7 trillion reduction in the deficit with a $2.7 trillion increase in the debt ceiling. The second thing the Republicans have asked for, not all, but many, is that we can't consider revenues in the package. Now, I disagree with that. I don't believe you could have a credible plan to deal with the deficit unless you include revenues, getting rid of the loopholes, getting rid of shelters. We could do that without increasing rates. We've said that many times. But the Reid proposal, what we would vote on by August the 2nd that accomplishes our goals, will do it without additional revenues. Now, it preserves the right of revenues in order to have a credible plan to reach the $4 trillion target, but we get our $2.7 trillion without any revenues, something that the majority of the Republicans have been asking for. And the third point, the $2.7 trillion in cuts that the majority leader had put on the table represent cuts that have been negotiated between the Democrats and Republicans. You know, $1.2 trillion is included in the with Vice President Biden. The $1 trillion in cuts in regards to our overseas operations was included in the Ryan budget, and the list goes on. So these are cuts that are achievable, that have been already negotiated or agreed to between Democrats and Republicans. You know, I applaud Senator Reid. I think Senator Reid understands the seriousness of us moving forward. It allows us to move the increase the debt ceiling and preserve our rights to negotiate and get the grand bargain done, and has a fallback mechanism with a joint committee that would have required votes on the floor to make sure we all have a chance to vote up or down. It preserves our options, allows America to move forward, and allows us to concentrate on job growth and security, which should be our focus as we rebound our economy for the future of our nation. For all those reasons, Madam President, I hope my colleagues will support the effort of Senator Reid to bring us together to avoid the unspeakable default that could occur 1 week from today. And with that, Madam President, I would yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll. Mr. Akaka.
promote the Republican leader. I'm not awake this morning.
I ask unanimous consent that further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Last night, the President explained to the nation the crisis that we face right now as he sees it. His hope was to lift the debate up out of the gritty legislative particulars, and we all understand that. Unfortunately, the situation the President described last night bears very little resemblance to the realities on the ground right here in Washington. I know the President would rather give speeches about our problems than resolve them, but he wasn't elected to talk about the United States. He was elected to lead it. And in our system of government, that means working with people and a Congress that you sometimes disagree with. This is not a unique situation. Other presidents have been in a similar situation where they had to work with a Congress composed of people, many of whom disagree with them. Last night, the President rejected not just the only proposal that has passed either House of Congress, he rejected the only plan the Democrats have proposed as well, a plan that would increase the debt limit without raising taxes. Just a few days ahead of a potential default, the President announced that he's the only person in Washington still calling for a massive tax hike, even as his party has dropped their own demands for what we know will make the current unemployment situation even worse. In short, the President is now clinging to two things we all know Congress can't support: a massive tax hike and the biggest debt limit increase in history, aimed, in his own words, at getting him past the next election. As Speaker Boehner said last night, that's just not going to happen. There's bipartisan opposition to it in Congress, so it was deeply irresponsible, in my view, for the President of the United States to present the American people with a false choice last night between tax hikes on the one hand and default on the other. The real choice is this: a bill that can get us past this moment of crisis, cuts Washington's spending, and actually get through Congress, or one that can't. Republicans have offered the only proposal that attempts to get at the root of the problem and which actually has a chance of getting to the President's desk. That's why we'll continue to press for the legislation Speaker Boehner has proposed. And that's why we'll fight against anything that pretends to solve the problem but doesn't. The Majority Leader proposed a plan yesterday that's nothing more than another attempt to pull the wool over the eyes of the American people. Madam President, the decisions we make in the next 72 hours will have a real impact on every American. These decisions should be made based on how they will affect the people who are struggling to get a job, not how they affect some politicians' chances of getting reelected. Now, the President can claim to be concerned about this impending crisis, but one question continues to linger above every press conference he's called or every speech he's delivered. Where is his plan to resolve it? Republicans have proposed multiple plans that have support in both parties. It's time for the President to put his electoral interests and preferences aside and do what's needed. Americans are waiting. Americans are waiting for the President to do what they elected him to do, not to lecture, but to lead. Madam President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll. Mr. Akaka.
Madam President, I ask that the quorum
The
call.
Senator from Arkansas.
Thank you, Madam President. Throughout the course of
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Madam President.
Senator is recognized.
Throughout the course of this debt ceiling debate, the American people have watched this work in utter disbelief of what they have seen. They understand that we need to get our fiscal house in order. They see what has gotten us into this mess, and they want it stopped before they agree to give us blanket authority to raise the debt limit. What they are saying is we must spend within our means just as they have to do. Well, we've got a way to do that. It is the Cut, Cap, and Balance Plan. It's already passed the House. A companion bill with 39 co-sponsors has the support that it should be considered here in this chamber as well. I'm proud to say that I'm one of those 39 co-sponsors of the Senate bill. I signed on to the Cut, Cap, and Balance bill because the American people, and more specifically the people of Arkansas, have demanded that we address this crisis now, not later. They know Washington is not good with remembering to follow through on the things they promised to do later. Some will say this is too simple an answer. They say that the fiscal mess we find ourselves in is a complex problem. It's really not, though. Just look at the numbers. This year alone, we will spend $3.7 trillion while collecting only $2.2 trillion. We borrow 40 cents of every dollar that we spend. President Obama and the Democratic majority in this chamber will say the way to fix this problem is to raise taxes. They may try to use other words and phrases like revenue enhancers when talking about raising taxes, but make no doubt about it, they want to put the onus back on the American people. There is a major problem with this approach. Washington doesn't have a revenue problem. It has a spending problem. Again, the numbers back this up. Traditionally, government spending is about 19% of our gross domestic product. Since President Obama has been in office, government spending has been much closer to 25% of our gross domestic product. This administration has raised federal spending to the highest rate, the highest peak since World War II. So how do we solve this spending problem? We do it through cut, cap, and balance. Cut now. The House bill immediately cuts over $100 billion in spending. Cap for the future. The spending cap mechanism in this bill caps spending over the next 10 years, bringing it down to less than 20% of our gross domestic product within the next 5 years. And the balance is for a balanced budget amendment, something our entire Republican caucus supports in the Senate, as do many in the Democratic majority, at least according to their on-the-record statements. This bill prohibits the Treasury from borrowing unless a balanced budget amendment is sent to the states for ratification. Let's pass a balanced budget amendment and give the people back home the decision about whether they want to require us to operate under a balanced budget amendment. I think you will find that they overwhelmingly do. Unfortunately, the Senate majority, with no plan of their own for reining in the out-of-control spending, won't allow us to have a debate on this bill. Last Friday, they moved to table the Cut, Cap, and Balance Act, effectively ending any consideration of the bill. All of this reminds me of the debate over the House-passed budget we had a few months ago. The majority over here had strong words of criticism, but no budget proposal of their own. Again, strong words of criticism and no plan of their own, only this time it's worse. With our nation on the brink of default, the majority clearly feels it's better to score political points than have a debate on the merits of our proposal. They control the floor, the agenda, and the amendments that are accepted. If any member of their caucus wants to change the bill, they certainly have that option. But instead of having the debate, we get political theater from the majority. This is not what our constituents deserve. They deserve a real debate. They sent us here to work together to prevent a catastrophe on par with that has happened in Greece, Ireland, and Portugal. They want to see us get our fiscal house in order. That is what the root cause of this crisis is all about. We aren't just having a debate on raising the debt ceiling. If that is all this discussion was about, it would have been over months ago. Nobody wants a default, so the debate that is going on today is about a much bigger problem, the out-of-control spending that has put us in this position time and time again. Cut, cap, and balance is one way to solve the problem. It is a solution that helps us avert an immediate meltdown and brings a sense of fiscal responsibility to Washington where it is so badly needed. Madam President, I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll. Mr. Akaka.